Hello everyone. Thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed to the channel. Anyone watching this and has not subscribed, please kindly do so. Thank you. Today we are heading straight to the United Nations Security Council. The United Nations Security Council veto power should be scrapped. The United States has recently shown support for increasing the representation of African nations in the United Nations Security Council. Specifically, the United States backs the addition of 2 permanent seats for African countries. However, America does not offer them the whole pie. It is giving them a seat but not full power. The United States opposes granting veto power to these new permanent members. The United States argues that giving 2 African countries the veto power at the Security Council's work will cause a work dysfunction. For the United States to say that is quite shocking. Truly unbelievable. It does not make any sense. How can you elevate or rather invite someone to the top table and then tell them, by the way, you can only eat the main food but nothing else? This kind of treatment is pretty much colonial. This is another awakening for the Africans. America should be ashamed of its pronouncements because it is colonialist. Always dictating on Africans. What a shocker. The structure of the Security Council has remained largely unchanged since its establishment in 1945, with 5 permanent members, the United States, China, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, holding veto power. This setup has often been criticized for not reflecting the current global dynamics. The debate over how to reform the Security Council to be more inclusive and representative has been ongoing for decades, with various proposals and disagreements on the best approach. So, America has already made sure that granting veto power to the new African members to the United Nations Security Council is complex and never straightforward. Seriously, some stupid African leaders who follow America and Europe better wake up. Completely wake up. America has made it clear that it is not terribly keen on progress. Expanding veto power to new permanent members should be able to address the constant imbalance caused by the current members. In case you have not noticed, United Kingdom follows whatever America says. How sad. In short, the majority of people are after fairness. Including more countries with veto power will enhance the legitimacy of the United Nations Security Council. It is going to make decision-making more representative of the global community. A more diverse set of veto-wielding members can prevent any single country or bloc from dominating the council, potentially leading to more balanced and fair decision-making. Granting veto power to new members can update the United Nations Security Council to reflect contemporary geopolitical realities. America saying that more veto-wielding members could lead to increased deadlock, and making it harder for the United Nations Security Council to take decisive action on crucial issues is absolute nonsense. The truth is that America is very afraid that Africans are going to vote fair and in truth to the situation on table every time. Africa is not going to be voting because some country is their friend. Africa is going to vote based on facts. The current permanent members may resist changes that dilute their power, making it politically challenging to implement such reforms. The debate continues. In the meantime, I am going to let you take a listen to Dr. Ericana. Her electrifying interview is full of bitter truth to swallow. This is the African Iron Lady. The structure of the Security Council has remained largely unchanged.
One of the most debated questions in the history of the United Nations. Why do only 5 countries have veto power over all decisions at the Security Council? For almost 80 years, they've been at the top of the food chain. China, France, Russia, the UK, and of course the United States. The world has changed since then, but the UN Security Council has not. Decades ago, the P5, or the Permanent 5 as they're called, decided to allow countries to join as rotating, non-permanent members with no veto. After all, the Security Council is the most powerful body at the UN, with the ability to impose sanctions and to authorize the use of force against countries. And now Washington is talking about creating permanent seats for 2 African nations, but get this, with no veto power. Why? And why now? Today we're talking with Adikana Chihombori, former ambassador of the African Union to the United States. Ambassador, it's terrific to have you back on our show. I want to start with a film clip of the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Let's listen.
As it stands, there are currently 3 non-permanent seats on the Security Council allocated to African countries on a rotating basis for 2 years. The problem is these elected seats don't enable African countries to deliver the full benefit of their knowledge and voices to the work of the Council, to consistently lead on the challenges that affect all of us and disproportionately affect Africa. That is why, in addition to non-permanent memberships for African countries, the United States supports creating 2 permanent seats for Africa on the Council. It's what our African partners seek, and we believe this is what is just.
Ambassador Chihombori, let me ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how enthusiastic are you about the proposal that the ambassador has just made?
I think it's a step in the right direction. However, keeping in mind that this issue has been on the table, ongoing for, like you said, 80 years. If we are going to right the wrong, why can't we just right this wrong once and for all? If Africa is going to become a member of the UN Security Council, a permanent member, they must have the full rights just like the other 5 members, which means they must have veto power. Inviting Africa to the table and then asking them to remain mute is an insult not only to the African leaders, but it is an insult to 1.4 billion people. We appreciate what Ambassador Greenfield is saying. We appreciate the efforts she has made. But if she is going to complete this journey that has been going on for far too long, a journey that clearly exemplifies the continued disrespect of the African continent, Ambassador Greenfield must push for us to take this issue to the finish line. Africa must have 2 permanent seats at the UN Security Council with full veto power. Nothing less is acceptable. And I do believe that the United Nations, understanding how long this issue has been going on, how long the disrespect of the African continent has been going on, it is shameful that the United Nations would want to continue to blatantly disrespect the Africans by inviting them to the table, but then saying, sorry, you can't eat. You can only watch us play our games. You can watch us enjoy the 10-course meal. What a joke. What an insult. And I do hope that the African leaders are not going to accept it. Africa must be at the table as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and the 2 seats must have veto power, plain and simple, period.
Do you think Ambassador Thomas Greenfield doesn't understand this? What do you think is behind this offer? When you said, hey, you appreciate the progress she's made, we do know that this was a promise or a commitment that President Joe Biden is trying to fulfill before the end of his term, but do you think they are not aware about how controversial it is to create permanent seats without votes?
Of course they know what they're doing. So, again, that's where the disrespect comes in. They know what they're doing. They know what the right thing to do is. No, we do not want to dilute our veto power if we give 2 more seats with veto power. No, we are simply saying the slice is big enough. The world is bigger than 5 countries representing over 7 billion people. We are simply saying serious wrongs have been perpetrated against Black people. Here is an opportunity for President Biden to right this wrong. This is an opportunity that we cannot miss. Africans must be at the table. 1.4 billion people must be represented. The continued disrespect of the Africans has got to come to an end. So we're asking President Biden and his running mate, Kamala Harris, who I hope will be the next president of the United States, they will right this wrong once and for all. And Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, we understand all the work that you have done. Please, as a sister, as an ambassador, we're asking you to take this issue to the finish line. Permanent positions on the UN Security Council with full veto power like the other 5 Ps.
I've seen that China and Russia are enthusiastic and do support Africa's position on the Security Council with 2 permanent seats, but I have not seen whether they would actually agree to giving the veto to African countries as well. Your thoughts?
Well, normally, like most issues pertaining to Africa, what I've found is that the United Nations usually, sorry, not the United Nations, the United States usually has the final say. If the United States is going to come in and say, we support fully Africa being on the UN Security Council with full veto power, I can assure you the other four members will follow suit. The United States, if the United States decides they do not wish for Africa to have veto power, it will not happen. But if the United States decides they do want Africa to have veto power, the other countries, I'm pretty sure, will follow suit.
One of the things that Linda Thomas Greenfield, the ambassador of the United States to the UN, said about her resistance to giving more countries a veto on this is that it would make the council more dysfunctional. And it made me wonder whether any nation should have a veto power. Is there a model in the future of the United Nations where we suspend veto power for all countries and we go to majority votes on key decisions?
First of all, I find that comment very, very insulting. You are simply suggesting that the addition of 2 African countries is going to make the process dysfunctional. What an insult. If this particular situation, we're talking a country like Germany, if we're talking any of the other European countries joining as members of the UN Security Council with veto power, would she still find it as a move that will introduce dysfunction? Or is it the introduction of 2 black African countries that is problematic? What really makes it very sad is that the voices are coming out of the mouth of a black woman. Those words are coming out of the mouth of an African American who must understand certain language cannot be used, particularly when we're talking about the international platform. To suggest that introducing 2 African countries will introduce dysfunction, it is sad, it is disrespectful, and it will not be tolerated. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield really needs to retract those words, and she needs to explain herself to say, what do you mean, dysfunction? Exactly how are the 2 African countries going to introduce dysfunction, unless, of course, the entity has already been dysfunctional, which in my opinion is the case, and that is what really is the problem with the United Nations. It's a dysfunctional entity, it is a toothless bulldog, and they need to do what they are mandated to do by the world. So yes, no, Africa is not going to introduce any dysfunction at the United Nations. The entity itself has been dysfunctional. Maybe an addition of 2 African countries might straighten it up and create some normalcy, and for a change have an entity that's going to truly represent people of the world. As it is right now, it is a relationship, it is an entity that was designed to steal from the developing nations. It is an entity whose entire purpose and plan and reason for being created was to steal from developing nations. So let's be clear. If we are going to speak truth to power, the UN Security Council has been dysfunctional, remains dysfunctional, until it is an entity that truly represents the whole world. At this point, the UN Security Council does not represent the world. So yes, they should be ashamed. It is a dysfunctional entity that maybe the inclusion of other nations might actually make it less dysfunctional.
Let me ask you to respond to Martin Kimani, who is the former Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations, and he writes, how does having 1 or 2 African countries with veto power further collective African interests? By the time Africa tears itself apart politically to choose those 2 countries, a fight that will be egged on by global powers, we will end up with deep division, possibly in perpetuity. UNSC reform must be preceded by major African Union reform. Your thoughts and reaction to that, Ambassador Chihombori?
With all due respect, I disagree with the brother severely. Africa must be at the table. We must be where decisions are being made. We must be in a position to also disagree or agree on global issues. Yes, while I understand the dysfunction among us as Africans and the African Union, And I've always said this, that at this point, we don't have the right leadership at the African Union. And I'm hoping that with the new elections that are coming up in February of next year, we are going to have an African Union chair with a head over their shoulders. Right now, we don't have any leadership at the African Union. Musa Faki has failed us. He's a puppet of the West. We all know that. So yes, I agree with him on one end that we do need reform at the African Union. The good thing for us is there are elections coming up. Musa Faki is going to be gone. And our hope is we're going to have a new chairman of the African Union who understands the issues and is going to reform the African Union where it can truly represent the people. That is where we need. We got our own homework to do. But that doesn't mean we should give out an opportunity to be at the table. So to just run off and say, well, we are dysfunctional at the African Union, and therefore we are not going to demand that seat at the United Nations Security Council, that's actually stupid. We need to be there while we continue to reform our African Union, while we continue to work together. And I can tell you, the African leaders, they work together. The issue is, do we have someone at the African Union who can implement and execute the wishes of the African Union? They have a system, even for choosing the chairman of the African Union. It's on a rotational basis. I don't see the African leaders having any problem deciding which two countries are going to be the first ones. They just use the same rotational process. Right. So, no, I disagree with that, Ambassador. Seriously, we need to be at the table. But more importantly, I am so glad that Musa Faki is leaving, and I'm hoping that the next chairman of the African Union, come February, is going to be a Pan-African who's going to stand up, defend Africa, and represent the continent like we must be represented. We demand that, and I'm hoping that we'll get that come February.